Back in September of 2021, the extension of the Northern Line to Battersea Power Station opened, marking the first major extension of the London Underground since the Jubilee Line extension all the way back in the 1990s. This extension was a pretty limited one, just adding a small branch after Kennington that serves two new stations at Nine Elms and Battersea Power Station. That said, during this extension's planning and eventual construction, a lot of people began to float the idea of making it go a bit further, to Clapham Junction. The rationale behind this was pretty simple. Clapham Junction is by far the busiest national rail station in London by passenger movements that doesn't have a connection with the Underground. If we measure it another way, by total train movements, the station becomes literally the busiest in Europe, which alone does seem like a pretty good justification for connecting it to the Underground. Back in 2013, before construction on the line to Battersea Power Station had started, London Assembly member Richard Tracy even said that an extension of it to Clapham Junction was a matter of when, not if. So, in this video, 4 years on from the Battersea branch's opening, we'll take a look at what progress has actually been made on finally seeing Clapham Junction get its tube connection. On top of that, we'll also look at the pretty obvious pros of building this, as well as some of the not so obvious cons. Hi all, I'm City Moose, and I make videos about transport and urbanism, so if that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing to the channel. If you want to support the channel, you can check out my Ko-fi, it is always greatly appreciated. Back to that Northern Line extension, and while the section to Battersea Power Station got built, obviously the next bit to Clapham Junction never did, at least not yet. But then, why wasn't that part included in the initial build? In some ways, that would have made more sense. By combining the Clapham Junction and Battersea sections of the build, you could reduce a lot of rework with things like planning and hiring contractors. It would have, of course, been more expensive than just building the line to Battersea, but the removal of all that rework would have saved money in the long run when compared to doing these sections separately. However, the simple reason this wasn't done was because of how the Battersea Power Station branch was funded. That being primarily by private developers who wanted the tube stations at Nine Elms and Battersea Power Station to support the developments they were undertaking in those areas, and as they weren't developing anything in Clapham Junction, they would have seen no reason to pay for the line to go that far. In fact, one could even say that they may have actively preferred this extension not to happen, as it would mean trains arriving into Battersea Power Station and Nine Elms would be full of commuters from Clapham Junction, making these stations less appealing to the new residents of these developments who, without the Clapham Junction connection, instead get to board much less crowded trains. With all that said though, during the planning and construction of the Battersea branch, effort was made to future-proof it for that potential Clapham Junction extension, and a route between Battersea Power Station and Clapham Junction, which would run beneath Battersea Park, has been reserved for the link's eventual construction. So once again, now that we're 4 years on from the Battersea branch's opening, has there been any progress made on getting it to Clapham Junction? Before I answer that though, let's change tracks for a minute, pardon the pun. Creating these videos is surprisingly time consuming, like we're talking about dozens of hours of researching, writing, recording, and then obviously editing, which I do have to squeeze alongside my actual full-time job. I'm not complaining because I genuinely love doing it, but it does mean I don't always have as much time as I'd like to do other important things like spending hours cooking dinner. However, even with these time constraints, I still think it's super important that my meals are tasty and nutritious. And that's why I've been using Huel, who've been nice enough to sponsor today's video. Now I actually have a bag right here with me. It's the Huel Black Edition powder in my personal favourite coffee caramel flavour, which I really like because it's obviously super tasty, but it's also a complete meal that contains a very substantial 40 grams of protein per serving. I've been using Huel for probably a bit over a year now, and I've personally found it to be a great option for a quick and tasty lunchtime meal that also has all the nutrients I need, including the right amount of protein, essential fats, carbohydrates, fiber, vitamins, and minerals as part of a balanced diet. It's also super quick to whip up. I just need to add some water to a shaker, then 2 scoops of Huel, shake it up, and I'm good to go. So get your Huel by scanning this QR code or using the link in the description below. And you can even get £10 off your first order when you use my code MOOSE on orders over £60. Getting back on topic though, and while there has not been a lot of progress made on the extension of the Northern Line's Battersea branch to Clapham Junction on the TfL front, and we'll see why that's the case later, there has actually been a bunch of work done fairly recently by Wandsworth Council. That council is in the process of developing a master plan for the Clapham Junction area that would see its already very busy town centre rejuvenated with new developments, housing and jobs. However, in the council's view, for For this work to go ahead, Clapham Junction Station will be in need of a serious upgrade. And as part of these upgrades, they are hoping to see the station finally get that Northern Line connection. To help get the ball rolling, the council initiated a feasibility study into whether the connection would even be possible, and when the results of the study came back in November of last year, they were quite positive, with the report finding that there would be no engineering or geological constraints to building the extension, and that when built, the extension would help reduce overcrowding and support development in the area. However, despite these positive outcomes, this has not yet been enough to convince the Department for Transport to actually fund the project. But this isn't stopping Wandsworth Council proceeding with their planning. Having completed the technical analysis, the council is now beginning the design and community consultation phase, with the hopes of having the master plan ready by mid-2026. Whether this will actually see the Northern Line extension get funded, however, still remains to be seen. While building it would bring quite a few pretty obvious benefits, it would have some maybe less obvious downsides that may make this project seem a bit less of a no-brainer. Let's start with those benefits though, and the most obvious one would be connectivity. It would create a new major interchange between the Tube network and National Rail, and with how busy Clapham Junction Station is, it would undoubtedly be quite a well-used one. That said, not everybody agrees though, and I've seen some people argue that the interchange isn't all that necessary as a big proportion of the trains passing through Clapham Junction are heading to Waterloo, where there is already the opportunity to change for the Northern Line's Charing Cross branch. So this extension would effectively just be duplicating that. Now, I do see the point, however, another big portion of the trains passing through Clapham Junction are heading to Victoria Station, where there is no Northern Line interchange. Some of these trains may stop at Balham, which does offer such an interchange, but not all of them do, and if the plan to split the Northern Line into two separate lines ever goes ahead, a topic I've covered in a separate video, I'll put a link to it on screen, Balham will most likely be served by the line that uses the Bank branch. So this extension, which would most likely use the Charing Cross branch in this scenario, would still provide a unique interchange. The same thing applies to the overground services at Clapham Junction, for whom this interchange would also be a unique one. Another pretty obvious benefit would be that it could take full advantage of the spare capacity of the trains running on the Battersea Power Station branch. At present, the trains running along this branch still are generally not that full. That's not a bad thing, but given how valuable rail capacity and direct links into central London can be in the city, I think there's an opportunity here to take full advantage of said capacity, which I think extending the line to Clapham Junction would do. It would also make the line more useful for people at Battersea Power Station and Nine Elms stations, as it would unlock much easier transfers to the various routes Clapham Junction provides. It is this capacity, however, that does represent one of those downsides I mentioned. It has been suggested that there may be so many people who would want to transfer to the Northern Line at Clapham Junction that it might end up overwhelming Clapham Junction Station as well as the Northern Line. Now, I don't particularly buy this argument. I don't think this piece of infrastructure would be so useful that too many people will want to use it is a particularly good reason not to build something. Instead, the focus should be on how the infrastructure can be built in such a way that can cope with this, and there have been a few ways suggested in this case. Firstly, Clapham Junction Station would need to be upgraded, which would need to include the construction of new concourses to accommodate the increased number of people wanting to move through the station to make the interchange. Honestly, regardless of whether this extension gets built, Clapham Junction is in sore need of an upgrade anyway. It can get quite overcrowded at peak times, and the station is just generally not a very pleasant place to move through. There is actually a bit of work already underway to improve the station, with some remodelling being done to the station entrance halls, but there is still, in my opinion, a fair bit more that could be done. Secondly, however, there would also need to be work done on the Northern Line to improve its capacity. This would come in the form of the previously mentioned plans to split the Northern Line into two separate lines. That, if done, would see the new lines capable of running about 28 to 32 trains per hour each, compared with the around 20 trains per hour that can be handled by the single Northern Line's current two central London branches. So a pretty big improvement. If both of these were done, I think the majority of concerns around capacity would be alleviated. But as always, these things are easier said than done. The Northern Line split would require making a substantial upgrade to the busiest line on the Underground, and similarly, any work done on Clapham Junction Station would mean working on the station that sees the most daily train movements in all of Europe, so it would undoubtedly be quite disruptive and probably very costly. There haven't been any detailed costings released yet, but the report by Wandsworth Council expects it would cost significantly more than £750 million for the new tunnels, the interchange station and some ventilation shafts. And that's not including some other expensive work like the upgrades at Camden Town Station that would be required to split the Northern Line. This kind of hits at the heart of the issue with this potential extension: its cost and where TfL chooses to spend their quite limited budget. They have a number of other major projects in their pipeline waiting for funding, like the Bakerloo Line extension to Lewisham or the DLR to Thamesmead. And unfortunately, it does look like they will need to pick and choose. On top of that, one of the bigger projects awaiting funding is Crossrail 2, which would also include a stop at Clapham Junction, potentially providing that station with even better connectivity than this Northern Line extension would. I have seen a few discussions online where people have said that given Crossrail 2 would provide that connectivity anyway, that the Northern Line extension to Clapham Junction won't be needed or isn't necessary. But I take a bit of a different view. Crossrail 2 will mean that Clapham Junction Station needs to be upgraded anyway, thus removing that obstacle. And I also think Crossrail 2 will benefit massively from the additional Northern Line interchange. On top of that, I think the Camden Town Station upgrades required to split the Northern Line are also more a matter of when rather than if. They would create so much more rail capacity in central London that I think they're a bit of a no-brainer. As such, this covers what I've said are the two biggest obstacles to building this extension: potential overcrowding along the Northern Line and at Clapham Junction. So I'd say rather than wait decades for Crossrail 2 to finally open, start work on the Clapham Junction and Camden Town upgrades now, and have this new tube connection at Clapham Junction already in place for Crossrail 2. But that is just ultimately my opinion. I would also like to hear from all of you on whether you reckon this project would be a good use of TfL's quite limited finances. So leave a comment below with your thoughts. As it stands presently, Wandsworth Council appears to be pushing forward with their planning for it. But whether or not TfL can secure the funding for it, and whether they will prioritise it over their various other initiatives, well, only time will tell. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you really enjoyed it, you could consider supporting me on Ko-fi, I do always appreciate it. But with that all said, I'm Kyle, aka City Moose, and as always, thanks for watching.